Hi, my name is Maya. I am 24 years old, and life has not been kind to me. I'm not ashamed to say that I've lived a life many would never dream of, not because it was glamorous or exciting, but because it was filled with struggles that seemed endless. I don't have a stable job, nor do I come from a family that could support me. For years, I lived on the streets, sleeping on cold pavements, finding shelter wherever I could. But my story isn't just about despair, it's about how life can change in the most unexpected ways. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small town with dreams bigger than the sky. My mother worked as a seamstress, and my father was a mechanic. We didn't have much, but our family was rich in love. That love, however, could only go so far. When I was 16, tragedy struck. My father died in a car accident, and my mother's health began to decline soon after. By the time I turned 20, she was gone too. With no other relatives to turn to and no money to my name, I found myself on the streets of a big city, clutching my few belongings and wondering how I'd survive. In those early days, I tried to find work, but my lack of experience and polished appearance worked against me. I started selling handmade bracelets on the sidewalk, using skills my mother had taught me. The little money I earned went to food, but it was never enough for a roof over my head. Nights were the hardest. The city can be a dangerous place for a homeless girl. I learned to keep moving, finding spots where I could blend into the crowd or stay unnoticed. I'd sleep at bus stations or under bridges, hoping morning would come quickly. One evening, as I sat by the entrance of a busy cafe, trying to sell my bracelets, a man walked by and dropped a few coins into my cup without looking at me. I glanced up to thank him, but he was already gone. Something about him caught my attention, though. He was well dressed, carrying an air of confidence that made him stand out. Little did I know that brief encounter would change my life. Weeks passed, and I continued my routine. One day, I noticed the same man entering the cafe. He seemed familiar, but I couldn't place him right away. As he left, he stopped by my spot and looked at the bracelets I was selling. "Did you make these?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. "Yes, I did," I replied, trying to hide the embarrassment of my situation. He picked one up and examined it closely. "You have talent," he said, handing me a $20 bill. "Keep the change." I was stunned. No one had ever paid so much for one of my bracelets. Before I could thank him properly, he smiled and walked away. That was the first real kindness I'd experienced in a long time. Over the next few weeks, he came by the cafe regularly. Each time, he'd buy a bracelet or two and chat with me briefly. I learned his name was Ryan, and he was a successful entrepreneur who owned several businesses in the city. He never pried into my situation, but he always left me with encouraging words that made me feel seen and valued. One rainy evening, I was sitting in my usual spot, drenched and shivering, when Ryan appeared again. This time, he didn't just buy a bracelet. He crouched down to my level and said, "You shouldn't be out here like this. Let me help you." I hesitated, unsure if I could trust him, but something about his sincerity broke through my walls. He handed me his business card and told me to call him if I ever needed anything. That night, I held the card tightly, wondering if this was a lifeline or just another dead end. The next morning, after a particularly rough night, I decided to take a chance. I borrowed a phone from a kind stranger and called Ryan. When he answered, I nervously explained who I was and why I was calling. To my surprise, he sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. He arranged to meet me later that day at the cafe. When we met, Ryan offered to help me get back on my feet. He connected me with a local shelter and even paid for me to stay in a small rented room until I could support myself. Over the following weeks, he went out of his way to help me find a job. With his encouragement, I applied for a position as a cashier at a boutique store and got it. As I started rebuilding my life, Ryan remained a constant presence. We'd meet for coffee or lunch, and he'd ask about my progress. His belief in me was something I'd never experienced before. Slowly, my self-esteem began to grow, and with it, my feelings for him. I tried to keep those feelings to myself, convinced that someone like him could never see me as more than a friend. But one evening, as we walked through a park, he stopped suddenly and looked at me. "Maya," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you're incredible. Do you know that?" I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just trying to make it through each day," I said. He shook his head. "No, you're so much more than that. You're strong, kind, and talented. And—" He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "I think I'm falling for you." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tears welled up in my eyes as I tried to process his words. "Ryan, I'm not sure what to say. My life is such a mess." He took my hand and smiled. "Everyone has a past, Maya. It's where you're going that matters, and I want to be part of that journey." From that moment, our relationship blossomed. Ryan's love gave me the strength to believe in myself again. I started taking classes to improve my skills and eventually opened my own small business selling handmade jewelry. Ryan supported me every step of the way, but he never made me feel dependent on him. He wanted me to stand on my own feet, and that's exactly what I did. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. What started as a chance encounter with a kind stranger turned into a love story I never imagined possible. Ryan didn't just change my life. He showed me that even in the darkest times, hope and love can light the way. As time went on, Ryan and I became inseparable. We shared everything, from our dreams and fears to our goals for the future. I met his family, who welcomed me with open arms despite my humble background. They saw the person I was becoming and the hard work I had put in to rebuild my life. Ryan's mother, in particular, became a guiding force in my life, offering advice and encouragement whenever I felt overwhelmed. One of the most defining moments of our journey came when Ryan invited me to one of his company's charity events. It was a grand affair, attended by the city's elite. I felt out of place at first, surrounded by people in designer gowns and tailored suits, but Ryan stayed by my side, reassuring me that I belonged there. During the event, Ryan introduced me to several influential people, describing me as his inspiration and the strongest person he'd ever met. I was overwhelmed by his pride in me. By the end of the night, I'd made connections that would later help me expand my business and even collaborate with larger brands. But life wasn't without its challenges. As our relationship deepened, there were moments of doubt and insecurity. I often worried that I wasn't good enough for Ryan, that my past would always be a shadow over our future. He, however, never let me sink into those thoughts for long. Maya, he'd say, you're my equal in every way that matters. Don't ever forget that. Eventually, Ryan proposed to me on a quiet evening by the riverside, the same spot where we'd first talked about our feelings. His words were simple but heartfelt. Maya, you've shown me what it means to truly love and believe in someone. Will you marry me? Through tears of joy, I said yes. Our wedding was a beautiful celebration of love, surrounded by friends and family who had witnessed our journey. It wasn't just a union of two people, but a testament to how love can transform lives. Today, as I sit in my cozy workshop designing new jewelry pieces, I often think about how far I've come, from a homeless girl selling bracelets on the street to a business owner married to the love of her life. My story is proof that life can change in unimaginable ways. Ryan and I now work together on various projects, including initiatives to help the homeless and empower others to rebuild their lives, just as I did. Our love story is far from conventional, but it's ours. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the darkest nights often lead to the brightest mornings.